I, Mary, have had the privilege of being by Queen Jadwiga's side, as her lady-in-waiting, since her earliest days as a princess. Although a woman, she was crowned king, not just a consort queen, to signify her sovereignty. It's a tale of a life destined for greatness, shaped by the complex political landscape of medieval Europe. Jadwiga was born to King Louis I and his second wife Elizabeth of Bosnia, in one of the grand palaces of Buda Castle. As a child, I recall her as a curious, intelligent and spirited young girl, with a mop of dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. Despite being born into royalty, Jadwiga was always approachable and kind to those around her, even as a toddler. Her early years were marked by tragedy, when her half-sister, Hedwig, the only surviving child from Louis and Margaret's union, died at a tender age. This left Jadwiga the sole heir to the thrones of Poland and Hungary, a substantial responsibility for one so young. As Jadwiga grew, so did her intellect and ambition. She was an avid reader, devouring the works of Greek philosophers, religious texts, and the chronicles of her ancestors' battles. Her tutors marveled at her aptitude for languages, mastering Latin, Greek, and several Slavic tongues by the time she reached her teens. Poland and Hungary were engaged in a complex web of alliances and rivalries during Jadwiga's coming of age. Her father, in a bid to secure the future of his kingdoms, began negotiating her marriage to William III of Austria, a strategic union that would have strengthened their eastern borders. However, the young princess had other plans. In a bold move, Jadwiga seized the opportunity to reclaim the Lithuanian throne for the Polish crown, which her predecessors had long coveted. She traveled to Vilnius, the capital of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, where she met Jogaila, the 18-year-old Lithuanian prince, who was reportedly more interested in his falcons than ruling. Despite their differences, Jadwiga saw a potential ally in Jogaila, whose vast territories would be crucial in countering the territorial ambitions of the Teutonic Knights. She proposed an unlikely union, marriage, with Jogaila converting to Christianity as a condition. The negotiations were contentious, but Jadwiga persisted, even in the face of her father's disapproval. In the end, it was Jadwiga's persuasive charm and Jogaila's admiration for her intelligence that sealed the deal. In 1386, the Lithuanian prince took the Christian name Władysław II Jagiello and became the King of Poland with Jadwiga as his queen. The way was paved for a historic alliance between their nations, forging a powerful Polish-Lithuanian commonwealth that would endure for centuries. As queen, Jadwiga continued to wield significant influence, advising Władysław on matters of state and championing the rights of the poor and the church. She oversaw the establishment of Kraków as the capital of Poland, transforming it into a thriving cultural and intellectual hub. Throughout her reign, Jadwiga remained true to herself, a female leader in an era where women's roles were largely defined by marriage and domesticity. Her intellect, courage, and vision left an indelible mark on the history of Central Europe. Even in death, her legacy endured, with Krakow's Wawel Cathedral becoming her permanent resting place, a testament to the power and resilience of this remarkable queen. As I look back on the life of Jadwiga, I am reminded of the many lessons she taught me, of the importance of believing in oneself, of standing up for one's convictions, and of the enduring strength of a partnership built on mutual respect and trust. Her story serves as a beacon of inspiration, reminding us that even in the most challenging of times, a single person can make a profound difference in the world. The chill of Wawel's stone seeps into my old bones, a familiar cold that has outlasted queens and kings. I rest my hand upon the cool, carved marble of her sarcophagus, the final throne of my queen Jadwiga. The flickering candlelight plays across the effigy, softening the lines of a face I knew better than my own. They have captured her piety, her regal bearing, but they could never capture the fire in her eyes, nor the tremor of doubt in her voice in the dead of night. The world remembers the saint, the founder of universities, the King of Poland. But I, Mary, remember the girl. My mind drifts back, past the years of her glorious reign, past the birth and tragic loss of her only child. Back to the suffocating silence that fell over the court in Buda in the autumn of 1382. King Louis the Great was dead. The heart of our world had stopped beating. I was little more than a girl myself, assigned to the youngest princess, Jadwiga, a child of barely 10 years old whose future was meant to be a quiet, comfortable life in Austria, as the wife of Duke William. I remember her then, all slender limbs and serious eyes, her mind already sharper than most men's at court, while her sister Mary, now Queen of Hungary, wept with a dramatic flair befitting her new station. Jadwiga sat by the window, embroidering a small tapestry, her stitches unnervingly precise. "They will not want me," she said, her voice a soft murmur, not looking up from her work. "The Polish lords. They will want my sister." "Of course they will want Queen Mary," I replied, trying to sound reassuring. "But her husband, Sigismund, will rule for them." Jadwiga finally looked at me, and her gaze was ancient. "No," she said, with a certainty that chilled me. "They will not be ruled by a German from Hungary. They will want a Piast on their own soil." Her prescience was terrifying. Within weeks, a delegation of Polish nobles arrived, their faces grim, their beards like iron wire. They bypassed Sigismund, rejected Queen Mary ruling from afar, and made their demand known to our distraught Queen Mother, Elizabeth. They wanted Jadwiga. They would accept no other. She was to come to Krakow, to be crowned not as queen consort, but as king. Rex Poloniae, a king. The arguments in the royal apartments were fierce. Queen Elizabeth, a woman forged in the crucible of politics, was torn between a mother's love and a dynasty's ambition. To send her youngest, her most scholarly and gentle child, into the viper's nest of Polish politics seemed a cruelty beyond measure. "She is promised to William." The Queen Mother raged one night, her voice echoing in the stone halls. "The Habsburgs will see this as a grave insult." I stood guard outside Jadwiga's door, listening. Inside, I knew the princess was not asleep. She was on her knees, praying. Not for deliverance, I think, but for clarity. The next morning, she emerged, her face pale but resolute. She found her mother in the throne room, and in a voice that carried the weight of a ruler twice her age, she said, "I will go, mother. If Poland needs me, I will go." The journey to Krakow was a blur of autumn colors and grim, watchful faces. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known: her family, the promise of a life with the boy she had been raised to love, the very language she spoke. I watched her grow smaller in the saddle with each passing league, yet her spine never lost its straightness. Her coronation was a spectacle of overwhelming gravity. I helped dress her in the heavy, unfamiliar robes, the ermine tickling her chin. As the archbishop placed the crown upon her head, I saw her knees tremble slightly beneath the weight of it all. She was a child, a 10-year-old girl in a cathedral full of powerful men who saw her as a symbol, a vessel for their ambitions. But as she turned to face them, her expression was not one of fear, but of profound seriousness. In that moment, she ceased to be a princess and became their king. The true test, however, came not from the lords or the Teutonic knights on her border, but from her own heart. A few years into her reign, William of Austria, her betrothed, arrived in Krakow. Handsome and charming, and representing the life she was supposed to have. He was her childhood dream made flesh. They met in secret, whispers of their supposed consummation of the marriage rite flying through the court like poisoned darts. For a brief, terrifying time, she was a girl again, torn between love and a duty she was only beginning to understand. The lords of Poland had a different husband in mind, a man they called a pagan barbarian from the dark forests of the north, Jogaila, the Grand Duke of Lithuania. He was nearly 3 times her age, a stranger with a foreign tongue and foreign gods. But he offered what William could not: the conversion of the last pagan nation in Europe, and the creation of a vast, powerful union that could stand against any threat. I will never forget the night she made her choice. The court was in an uproar, with factions forming for William and for Jogaila. William's supporters had smuggled him into the castle. I found Jadwiga by a locked gate, an axe from a guard's post clutched in her hands, her face a mask of tear-streaked desperation. She was going to break down the door and run to him, forsaking her crown, her kingdom, everything. "My queen," I pleaded, taking her arm. Think of your people. Think of the souls in Lithuania who know nothing of God." Her shoulders heaved with sobs. The sobs of a girl being asked to sacrifice her own heart for the world. She dropped the axe, and the clang echoed on the stones like a final, mournful bell. She leaned her forehead against the cold, unyielding wood of the gate. "My happiness is not the purpose of my life, is it, Mary?" she whispered, her voice broken. "The purpose of my life is Poland." She sent William away. It was an act of courage so profound it felt like a physical blow to all who witnessed it. She met Jadwiga, a man who towered over her, his face weathered by war and hardship. I watched that first meeting, saw the curiosity in her eyes replace the fear. She did not see a barbarian, she saw a man of strength, a leader. And he, in turn, did not see a child bride. He saw a formidable intellect and a spirit of pure steel. Their marriage was not a romance, not at first. It was a partnership, forged in the fires of political necessity, but it grew into something deeper. I saw the respect in his eyes when she debated theology with visiting bishops, or when her sharp diplomatic letters outmaneuvered the Teutonic knights. He listened to her counsel, valued her wisdom, and together, they built an empire. She steered his raw power with her cultivated grace, founding the university that would become a beacon of learning, pouring her personal wealth into hospitals and aid for the poor. She became the mother of her people, not just their monarch. And now she is gone. The great queen, the benevolent king, lies here in this cold stone. But as I stand here, in the quiet sanctity of her final rest, I know that her story did not end. It was merely given to the ages. She taught me, and taught her world, that power is not a birthright to be enjoyed, but a sacred duty to be born. She proved that the heart of a kingdom can beat within the breast of a young girl, and that a single, selfless choice can change the course of history forever. Her life was a lesson, and her reign, a testament. Her legacy is not carved in this marble, but etched into the soul of a nation. But that future, the one etched in stone and scripture, was forged in a crucible of heartbreak I doubt any other child has ever endured. I was there. I saw the fire that nearly consumed her, and the steel it left behind. Her story, as the world knows it, began with a coronation. But her reign, the one of legend, began in a locked room with an axe in her hand. It started not long after the crown. A heavy gold circlet far too large for her head was placed upon her brow. They called her Rex Poloniae, King of Poland, a title meant to give her an authority she did not yet possess, a legal fiction to appease the grumbling lords who would never bow to a mere queen consort. For a few weeks, there was a fragile peace. Jadwiga, only 11 years old, moved through the cold halls of Wawel Castle. With a determined grace, her mind sharp and her questions sharper. She was learning the difficult dance of politics, the subtle shift of an eye, the weight of a carefully chosen word. She believed, in her youthful innocence, that if she played their game well, she would be granted the one thing her heart desired, her promised marriage to William of Austria. William was not just a name in a treaty to her. They had grown up together in the vibrant courts of Vienna and Buda. He was the warmth of shared laughter, the memory of stolen sweets, the boy who understood the gilded cage of their birth. He was her friend, her intended. He was her future. The blow came on a grey autumn afternoon. The lords of Lesser Poland, led by the shrewd Archbishop Bodzanta, requested an audience. I stood behind her chair, arranging the heavy velvet of her gown, and felt the chill in the room long before the first word was spoken. They were polite, their bows deep, their words cloaked in the language of duty and necessity. They spoke of the Lithuanian threat, of the vast pagan lands to the east, and of a grand opportunity to bring them into the fold of Christendom. A union, the Archbishop said, his voice smooth as polished stone, that would secure our borders, enrich our kingdom, and save 1 million souls for God. Jadwiga listened patiently, her small hands resting on the arms of her throne. A noble goal, Your Grace. What is it you propose? We propose a new match, Your Majesty. For you? The air thickened. I watched the color drain from her face, leaving her skin as pale as winter milk. I am betrothed, she said. her voice a thread of ice. To Duke William of Austria, the vows were sworn. The union is blessed. A gruff baron from Krakow, a man named Safraniek, stepped forward. A childhood promise, Majesty. It cannot stand against the needs of the kingdom. The Pope can be petitioned. The arrangement dissolved. We have found a more suitable husband. Grand Duke Jadwiga of Lithuania. He will convert, he and his entire people, in exchange for your hand. I saw the tremor in her fingers before she clenched them into fists. A pagan? You would have me marry a barbarian I have never met, and cast aside a Christian prince, my sworn husband. The word husband was a desperate claim, a shield against their logic. He will not be a pagan for long, the archbishop insisted gently. Think of it, Jadwiga. You would be an apostle in a crown. But she was not thinking of apostles. She was thinking of William. She rose from the throne, a child swallowed by the cavernous hall, yet her fury made her seem to grow. You cannot do this, she whispered, her voice shaking with a rage that stunned them into silence. I am the king, I forbid it. But they could. And they would. Her authority was a gift from them, and they could just as easily rescind it. They left her then, standing alone in the center of the great hall, the weight of their decision pressing down on her. The moment the doors boomed shut, she collapsed into my arms, the rigid monarch dissolving into a sobbing child. The weeks that followed were a torment. Word reached us that William, hearing of the Polish noble's treachery, was riding for Krakow to claim his bride. Jadwiga's despair turned to a fierce, secret hope. She wrote to him, smuggling letters through loyal servants, her words filled with promises of fidelity and plans for their reunion. When he finally arrived, under the cloak of darkness, it was as if the sun had returned to her world. They met in secret, in the shadowy corners of the Franciscan monastery, whispering vows anew. But secrets in a royal court are like water in a sieve. The lords discovered William's presence and were enraged. They saw him as a threat, a foreign interloper, who could undo their grand Lithuanian gambit. They confined Jadwiga to her chambers, posting guards at her door. She was no longer their king, she was their prisoner. It was then that I saw the true measure of her spirit. She did not weep or plead. A cold, hard resolve settled over her. One evening, as the bells of the cathedral tolled for vespers, she turned to me, her eyes gleaming with a strange light. Mary, she said, her voice low and steady, they have left me no choice. A king does not beg. A king acts. Before I could ask what she meant, she strode to the great stone fireplace and seized a heavy woodsman's axe that was kept for splitting kindling. It was absurdly large in her grasp, the iron head nearly outweighing her. Your Majesty, what are you doing? I cried, rushing to her side. I am going to my husband, she declared, her jaws set. She marched to the heavy oak door of her chambers, the guards outside shuffling their feet, oblivious. With a cry that was part anguish and part war cry, she swung the axe. The sound was tremendous, a deafening crack of iron against wood that echoed down the stone corridor. Splinters flew. The guards, shocked into action, burst into the room to find their 11-year-old monarch. Her face streaked with tears and sweat, hacking at the door that imprisoned her. She swung again and again, the axe biting deep into the ancient wood. She was not just trying to break down a door, she was trying to tear down the entire political machine that was crushing her. They disarmed her, of course. A grizzled old guard, his face a mask of pity and astonishment, gently pried the axe from her exhausted fingers. She did not resist. She simply stood there, breathing in ragged gasps, her small rebellion over. That was the turning point. In the quiet that followed, something within her shifted. The defiant girl who had wielded the axe was gone, and in her place, a queen began to emerge. She spent days in prayer, seeking a different kind of strength. The venerable Bishop of Krakow spoke with her for hours, not of politics or treaties, but of sacrifice, duty, and God's mysterious will. He told her that her personal happiness was a small price to pay for the salvation of an entire nation. Slowly, painfully, she began to see her fate not as a prison, but as a purpose. The choice was not between William and Jadwiga. It was between her own heart and the future of Poland. It was a burden no child should have to bear, but she bore it. She sent a final, heartbreaking message to William, releasing him from his vows and telling him to leave Krakow for his own safety. Then, with a composure that belied her years, she informed the council that she would accept their proposal. She would marry the Grand Duke of Lithuania. She would do her duty. But her story, the one that truly forged the queen she became, began not in triumph, but in tears, and with the clang of a woodsman's axe against an unforgiving oak door. Before the university, before the Union of Nations, before the venerated saint, there was a girl of 12, trapped in the cold stone of Wawel Castle, her heart a battleground for empires. I remember those summer days of 1385, as if they were shrouded in a perpetual twilight, the sun's warmth unable to penetrate the thick walls of the castle or the thicker gloom of political necessity. The whispers had been slithering through the corridors for months. Jogala. The name was a harsh foreign sound on our Polish tongues, spoken with a mixture of fear and pragmatic hope. A pagan, a barbarian from the dark forests of Lithuania, they said. A man of 35, more than 3 times her age. But he was also a warrior, a Grand Duke whose lands could shield us from the ever-present threat of the Teutonic Knights. The lords of Lesser Poland, their faces grim and set as the gargoyles on the cathedral, saw in him not a man, but a fortress. For my Jadwiga, he was a monster from a cautionary tale. Her heart, as much as it had been promised to anyone, belonged to William of Habsburg. They had grown up together, their betrothal a sweet and simple thing woven from shared childhood games and the soft-spoken promises of their parents. He was 14, handsome in that fledgling way of young lords, all sharp angles and earnest eyes. He was the world she knew, the future she had been taught to expect. He represented a life of courtly grace, of shared language and faith, of ease. The crisis came to a head when the message arrived from her mother, Queen Elizabeth in Buda. William's father was demanding the consummation. The word hung in the air, grotesque and clinical, when spoken in relation to my young queen. A ceremony, they called it, a symbolic bedding to make the marriage bond unbreakable before the Polish lords could sever it. Queen Elizabeth had agreed, contingent on Jadwiga being declared mature. The race had begun. William himself arrived in Krakow not long after, a bold, perhaps foolish move to claim his bride. I was with Jadwiga in her chambers, brushing the tangles from her long, honey-blonde hair, when his presence was announced. She dropped the silver mirror she was holding, its clatter on the stone floor a sharp crack in the suffocating silence. "He is here, Mary," she breathed, her blue eyes wide with a desperate, childish hope. "Truly, he is, Your Majesty." She flew from her seat, a whirlwind of velvet and silk, her face alight with a joy I had not seen in months. They met in the courtyard, a brief stolen moment under the watchful eyes of both Polish and Austrian guards. I saw them from the gallery window. They did not embrace. The protocol was too strict. But they stood close, their hands almost touching, their low, urgent whispers lost to the wind. For a fleeting instant, they were not a king and a prince, but just a girl and a boy, caught in a tempest they could not control. That single meeting hardened the resolve of the Polish nobility. They saw William not as a suitor, but as an infection that had to be purged. A delegation, led by the Stoic Chancellor Zaklika, requested an audience. I stood behind Jadwiga's throne, my hands clenched in the folds of my gown. She sat so small in the enormous chair, her feet barely touching the footstool, yet she held her chin high. "Your Majesty," the Chancellor began, his voice devoid of warmth, "the union with the Habsburgs is a sapling in a storm. It cannot protect the realm. The union with Lithuania, that is an ancient oak. It will give Poland roots and a shield against our enemies. You must think of your people, of the cross triumphing over the pagan darkness, of a kingdom united and strong." "And what of my word?" she asked, her voice a fragile chime. "The vows made in my name. Does honor mean nothing? An oath made for a child is not an oath that can bind a king," another lord intoned. "Your first and only oath is to this land, to Poland." They spoke to her as if she were a holy relic, a symbol to be moved into its proper place for the good of the kingdom. They did not see the terrified girl who wept into her pillow at night, who, clutched the small locket William had given her as if it were a rosary. The breaking point came a few days later. The council formally voided her betrothal to William and barred him from the castle. The news struck Jadwiga like a physical blow. I found her in her chambers, her face pale and streaked with tears, a terrible cold fire burning in her eyes. She was no longer weeping. She was incandescent with rage. "They will not do this to me," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl I had never heard before. "I am the king. I will not be a prisoner in my own castle. Mary, fetch my cloak." Before I could reason with her, she was sweeping through the halls, a storm of righteous fury. She strode to the lower gates of the castle, the ones that led out into the city where William was lodged. Her personal guards, loyal but terrified of the council, blocked her path. "Open this gate," she commanded. "In my name." The captain of the guard, a weathered veteran named Grozagors, dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty, I cannot. The council has forbidden it. I am your king, not the council." "Open it." He shook his head, his face a mask of misery. "My life is yours, my queen, but I cannot disobey the sejm." That was when I saw her resolve harden into something terrifying and magnificent. She turned, her eyes scanning the courtyard, and they landed on the woodsman's corner, where a pile of logs lay next to a chopping block. An axe, its blade glinting dully in the torchlight, was embedded in the block. Without a word, she walked over and pulled it free. The thing was heavy, made for a man's arms, but she held it with both hands, its haft resting against her shoulder. She marched back to the gate, her silks trailing in the dust. And with a cry that was equal parts grief and defiance, she swung the axe at the thick oak door. The sound was shocking, a deep, resounding thud that echoed through the courtyard. Chips of wood flew. The guards stared, horrified and frozen. She raised it again, her small frame straining with the effort. It was a desperate, hopeless act, the rebellion of a caged soul. Just as she was about to strike a third time, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was old Dimitar of Goraj, one of the few councillors who seemed to see her as more than just a political pawn. He was ancient, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He did not try to take the axe from her. He simply stood before her, his presence a sudden bastion of calm. "My king," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "Look at your hands. They are made to hold a scepter, to dispense justice, to be clasped in prayer for your people. They are not made for this brute work." Jadwiga stared at him, panting, the axe held low. "The boy you love offers you a heart," Dimitar continued gently. "The man you do not know offers you a nation. He offers you the baptism of thousands, an end to the butchery on our borders. He offers you the chance to do a good in this world so great that your personal sorrow, as deep as it is, will be but a single drop in a holy ocean. They ask you to sacrifice your love. I ask you to embrace your destiny. What will you choose, Jadwiga of Poland?" She stood there for a long time, the torchlight flickering on the tear tracks on her cheeks, and the sharp edge of the axe. The weight of his words, of 2 kingdoms, of countless souls, seemed to press down on her, extinguishing the fire of her rebellion, and replacing it with a heavy, solemn glow. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered the axe and let it fall to the cobblestones with a final metallic clang. She looked at the scarred door, then at her own trembling hands. When she turned back to us, the girl was gone. In her place stood the queen. Her childhood ended in that courtyard, sacrificed on an altar of duty. And it was there, in that moment of profound loss, that her true reign began. But her legacy was not built in a day, nor was it forged in the quiet solitude of prayer alone. I remember the years that followed her marriage, the years that tested the very foundations of the union she had sacrificed so much to create. The wedding itself was a strange and solemn affair. Here was our Jadwiga, a jewel of Christendom, learned in letters and arts, bound to a man who had only just shed the skin of his pagan past. Jogaila, or Ladislaw as he was now called, was older, his face a map of battles and forests unknown to us. The Polish court whispered, their eyes full of doubt. They saw a barbarian prince. I saw a man who watched our queen with a kind of bewildered reverence, as if he had captured the moon and was unsure of what to do with it. Their partnership, the diarchy that so baffled the other courts of Europe, began not in the bedchamber, but in the council room. I would watch them from my corner, mending a tapestry or sorting correspondence. Ladislaw, with his gruff voice and pragmatic mind, would lay out matters of war and border disputes. Jadwiga, her voice calm and clear, would counter with points of law, theology, and diplomacy. She spoke of establishing a university in Krakow, of funding hospitals, of ensuring the laws of the kingdom were just. At first, the hardened nobles looked only to the king, but soon they learned. When Ladislaw would pause, turning to his wife and asking, "And what does the queen say?" they knew her word was not suggestion, but law. Their respect was not given. It was earned, day by painstaking day. It was her faith, however, that remained the anchor of her soul. Every morning before the court stirred, I would accompany her to the cathedral. In the pre-dawn chill, wrapped in simple wool cloaks, we would kneel. Her true counsel was held there, in the silent echoing space before the great black crucifix. I never heard the Christ speak to her, as the legends now claim, but I saw the change in her. She would enter with the weight of the kingdom etched upon her brow, and leave with a serenity that defied circumstance, a resolve as unshakable as the stone pillars around us. It was in that sacred quiet that she found the strength to rule. That strength was sorely tested some 6 years into their reign. The whispers arrived like a plague on the wind, carried by merchants and couriers from the south. Sigismund of Hungary, her own sister's husband, was plotting against Poland. He saw our kingdom not as an ally, but as a prize to be carved up. Ladislaw was furious, his instinct to raise the banners and meet this threat with steel. The council was a storm of angry voices and clashing ambitions. But Jadwiga was the calm eye of the storm. "He is my sister's husband," she said one evening, her voice soft but firm as she addressed the king in their private chambers. I was lighting the lamps and pretended not to listen. "Mary is Queen of Hungary. A war between us is a war between sisters. It is a poison that will sicken our houses for generations. I will go to her." Ladislaw protested, fearing for her safety, arguing it was a fool's errand. "Sigismund is a serpent, my love. He will not be charmed by sisterly affection." "I am not going to charm Sigismund," Jadwiga replied, her gaze meeting his without a flicker of doubt. "I am going to remind my sister that blood is thicker than the ambitions of men." And so, she went. Her journey to Hungary was not one of martial power, but of regal grace. She took with her not an army, but a retinue of scholars, ladies and priests. When she met her sister, Queen Mary, the reunion was fraught with the unspoken tensions of their husbands' animosity. I watched them in the gardens of Buda, two queens trapped in a gilded cage of politics. They spoke of their childhood, of their shared faith, of the burdens they both carried. Jadwiga did not threaten, she reasoned. She spoke of their shared heritage, of the bonds that tied their kingdoms together, and of the Turkish menace to the south that Sigismund ought to be focused on. She appealed not to Mary the Queen, but to Mary the sister. It worked. Sigismund, facing a united front from his own wife and a formidable diplomatic presence from Jadwiga, found his schemes unraveling. Preoccupied with protecting Hungary's borders from the encroaching Ottoman threat, he abandoned his designs on Poland. Jadwiga had won a victory without a single drop of blood being spilt. She returned to Krakow not to rest, but to face another fire. Ladislaw's Lithuanian homeland was a cauldron of familial strife. His brothers and cousins, proud and warlike men, were locked in a bitter feud for power and land. The new union between Poland and Lithuania, so carefully crafted, was in danger of shattering before it had even truly solidified. Ladislaw, for all his strength, was too close to the conflict, his own loyalties and history clouding his judgment. Once again, it was Jadwiga who stepped into the breach. The following year, we traveled east, deep into the vast, ancient forests of Lithuania. It was a world away from the spires of Krakow. The air was different, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The castles were rough-hewn fortresses of wood and stone, and the lords who greeted us were fierce men, their eyes full of suspicion. They saw her as a foreign queen, a Polish woman come to meddle in their affairs. I will never forget the sight of her in the great hall at Vilnius, a lone woman seated at a heavy oak table, surrounded by powerful bearded warriors who could have snapped her in two. They shouted at one another in their own tongue, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. Jadwiga sat in silence, listening. She had spent months learning their language, and she let them exhaust their rage. When at last a tense silence fell, she began to speak. Her Lithuanian was accented, but her words were precise. She spoke not of Polish interests but of theirs. She spoke of the strength a united Lithuania would have, of the prosperity that would come from peace, of the common Christian faith that now bound them to a larger world. She listened to each man's grievances, acknowledged their pride, and masterfully wove a tapestry of compromise. She offered justice, not conquest. I saw the change in their faces as she spoke. Suspicion gave way to grudging respect, and then to a kind of awe. Here was not a conqueror, but a peacemaker. Here was a queen who ruled not by divine right alone, but by a divine wisdom that saw the humanity in even her fiercest opponents. By the time we left Lithuania, the feuds were settled, and the union was secure. She had done what Władysław and his warriors could not. She had forged a peace with words. Those years defined her. They showed the world, and perhaps even her husband, the true nature of her power. It was not a power that came from a crown or an army, but from an unyielding intellect, a profound empathy, and a faith that moved more than mountains. It moved the hearts of men. Her story, as I witnessed it, was never about simply being a woman in a man's world. It was about being a sovereign who understood that the sharpest weapon in any arsenal is a brilliant mind, and the strongest shield is a righteous heart. The cold stone of her sarcophagus offers no warmth, but I touch it all the same. Here, in the hallowed silence of Wawel Cathedral, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and ancient prayers, my queen sleeps. But her spirit, her legacy, that is anything but silent. It echoes in the halls of the university she championed, in the fragile peace she brokered, and in the memory of an old woman who was once a girl at her side. My name is Mary, and I was her lady-in-waiting, her confidant, her shadow. The world remembers the queen, but I remember the woman. My reflection, as I look back, often settles on the year 1395. It was a year carved from ice and sorrow. A messenger arrived from Hungary, his face grim, his cloak dusted with the roads of a kingdom in turmoil. My queen's sister, also named Mary, had died. A fall from her horse, they said, a cruel, senseless end. With her death, the crown of Hungary by right of an old and solemn agreement, was Jadwiga's. I remember the Polish nobles gathering in the courtyard, their voices a low, excited hum. 2 crowns. A Polish-Hungarian empire, stretching from the Baltic to the Adriatic. They saw glory, power, a vast dominion. I watched Jadwiga as she received the news. She stood by a mullioned window, looking out not at the celebrating courtiers, but towards the southern sky, as if she could see her sister's soul ascending. There was no flicker of ambition in her eyes, only a profound and bottomless grief. "They want me to claim it," she said to me later, her voice quiet in the flickering candlelight of her chambers. The Hungarian delegation had arrived, a fractured group of lords, some eager for her rule, others loyal to the widowed Sigismund, who was away warring with the Turks. They offered her a throne steeped in chaos. "It is your right, your majesty," I murmured, straightening the ermine on her chair. She turned to me, and her gaze was so clear, so piercing. It felt as though she could see the very thoughts in my head. My right, Mary? Or their ambition? To claim Hungary now would be to march our soldiers into a land already bleeding. It would mean war with Sigismund, war amongst the Hungarian nobles themselves. Another generation of Polish sons would die for a crown. I do not need. She ran a hand over a map of the kingdoms, her fingers tracing the borders not as lines of possession, but as veins of a living body. Poland needs healing. Lithuania needs faith. A crown forged in widows' tears and orphans' cries is not one I wish to wear, and so, she let it go. She accepted the title of heir, a diplomatic necessity, but she never pursued the claim. The nobles were baffled, some even angered by her lack of what they saw as proper kingly ambition. But I saw it for what it was. The strength not to take, but to build. The wisdom to know that true power lay not in the breadth of one's lands, but in the peace of one's people. That desire to build found its truest expression 2 years later. The Lithuanian people, Jogaila's people, were new to the Christian faith, their old ways still whispering in the rustle of the primeval forests. The priests and scholars sent to them were often German or Polish, speaking a different tongue, bringing a faith that felt foreign. Jadwiga saw this disconnect with a scholar's precision. One evening I found her not with state documents, but surrounded by letters and charters. Her brow furrowed in concentration. "We cannot expect a tree to flourish if we do not nourish its roots, Mary," she said, looking up at me. "The Lithuanians need their own teachers, their own priests, men who understand their hearts and speak their language." Her vision was for a college, a place of learning nestled in the great city of Prague, under the patronage of King Wenceslaus. It would be a sanctuary for Lithuanian minds, a place where they could learn theology and philosophy, and then carry that knowledge home as a torch lit from a friendly fire. She poured her energy into it, writing letters, securing funds, drafting the charter herself. When the charter was issued in November of 1397, Jogajla looked at her with an expression I had rarely seen on the stoic Grand Duke's face, a mixture of awe and profound love. He saw what I saw, a queen who cared as deeply for his people as she did for her own. It was not a union of crowns, but of souls. This partnership was tested most fiercely in the face of the Teutonic Knights. They were a constant, menacing shadow on the northern border, their white mantles emblazoned with black crosses, a symbol of pious cruelty. They claimed to be converting the pagans of the north, but their true mission was conquest, their swords dipped in greed. They saw the new union of Poland and Lithuania as a threat, and sought any pretext to undermine it. A border dispute simmered, threatening to boil over into all-out war. Jogajla, a warrior by nature, was prepared to meet them in the field. But Jadwiga proposed a different path. "Let me speak with them," she urged him. "They will not expect it. They see a woman, a queen known for her piety. They will underestimate me." To show his absolute faith in her, Jogajla bestowed upon her 2 Lithuanian duchies, making her not just his wife, but a ruler in Lithuania in her own right. Her authority was now undeniable. I traveled with her to the negotiating site, a wind-swept plain where grand pavilions had been erected. The air was thick with tension. The Grand Master of the Order and his commanders arrived in full plate armor, their arrogance a palpable force. They strode into the tent as if they were conquerors already. Jadwiga met them not in armor, but in a simple dark gown, her only adornment a plain wooden cross around her neck. She was calm, her composure a stark contrast to their bristling aggression. I stood behind her chair, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. The Grand Master spoke first, his voice dripping with condescension, listing his grievances, and subtly questioning her authority to even be there. He spoke of pagan remnants and broken promises, his words a thin veil for his territorial ambitions. When he finished, there was a heavy silence. Jadwiga did not respond with anger or threats. She simply looked at him, her gaze level and unwavering. "Grand Master," she began, her voice clear and resonant, filling the tent. "You speak of promises. Let us speak of the promise you made to God when you took the mantle of this order. Is it your sacred duty to seize land from newly baptized Christians? To harass the flock you are sworn to protect?" She addressed each of his points with flawless logic, citing treaties they had broken, quoting scripture they had ignored. She exposed their hypocrisy not with passion, but with irrefutable fact. She spoke of the poor farmers whose fields had been burned, the villages raided under the sign of the cross. "God sees the truth of your claims, Grand Master, as do I," she concluded, her voice softening but losing none of its power. "Your cross is meant to shield the innocent, not to be a banner for conquest. I pray you remember that before you compel us to defend our people with the sword." The knights were stunned into silence. They had come expecting to intimidate a woman. They found themselves facing an intellect as sharp as any blade, and a moral authority they could not assail. They tried to bluster, but their arguments crumbled against her calm certainty. The dispute was settled in 1398, not by bloodshed, but by the quiet courage and unassailable reason of my queen. Now, I stand here, an old woman before a cold tomb. I touch the carved likeness of her face, and I see her again at that window, mourning her sister, and choosing peace. I see her bent over her desk, founding a college with ink and hope, and I see her in that tent, taming the wolves of the north with nothing but her words and her will. The world remembers Jadwiga, the king, but I remember the woman who taught me that a crown's true weight is in the burdens you choose to carry for others, and a kingdom's true strength is measured not in its armies but in its wisdom. Her story, our story, did not end here in this cathedral. It lives on, a quiet, enduring light, in a world that is too often dark. But her story, as I knew it, was not one of distant battles or political treaties signed in ink. It was a story of breath and bone, of quiet strength and, in the end, of profound, heart-wrenching sorrow. The lessons I learned were not from her decrees, but from watching her live, and from being by her side as she prepared to die. The change began in the winter of 1398. After 12 long years of a union forged for the sake of two nations, a new, private hope began to blossom within the walls of Wawel Castle. A hush of anticipation fell over the court, a collective holding of breath. My queen, Jadwiga, was with child. The whispers followed her through the cold stone corridors. A boy it must be, a boy, an heir to unite the bloodlines of Piast and Jagiellon forever. I saw the weight of this expectation settle on her shoulders, but beneath it, I also saw a light I had not seen before. It was the pure, unburdened joy of a woman about to become a mother. Her husband, the great King Jadwiga, a man more comfortable on a battlefield than in the tapestry-hung halls of the court, was transformed. The gruffness in his voice softened when he addressed her. I would often see him place a hand, broad and calloused from a lifetime of wielding a sword, gently upon her swelling abdomen, his expression a mixture of awe and fierce protectiveness. Their partnership, always one of mutual respect, had deepened into a tender intimacy that was a marvel to behold. In those months, they were not just a king and queen, they were simply a man and a woman awaiting their child, their hopes intertwined with the fate of a kingdom. The summer arrived, blanketing Krakow in a warm golden haze. In late June, after a long and arduous labor, the bells of the cathedral rang out. But they did not announce the birth of a prince. My queen had delivered a daughter. In the chamber, heavy with the scent of lavender and sweat, Jadwiga held the tiny infant and smiled, her face pale but luminous. "We will name her Elizabeth Bonifacia," she whispered, her voice weak, but clear, honoring her own mother and the Pope who was her godfather. There was a flicker of disappointment in the court, a muted sigh for the son that was not to be. But Jadwiga cared not. She loved the child with a ferocity that seemed to pour all of her own life force into the fragile, swaddled bundle. For 3 weeks, a fragile peace reigned. I watched Jadwiga hum lullabies, her fingers tracing the downy hair on her daughter's head. It was a brief, sunlit idyll, a glimpse of a different life she might have led. Then, as swiftly as a summer storm rolling in from the Tatras, the darkness fell. The little princess grew weak. The royal physicians came and went, their faces grim, their satchels of herbs and tinctures proving useless. Prayers were offered in every church in the city, the smoke of 1,000 desperate candles rising to the heavens. But God, it seemed, was not listening. On the 13th day of July, Elizabeth Bonifacia drew her last shallow breath in her mother's arms. A silence descended upon the castle, heavier and more suffocating than any winter snow. The loss of the child was a tragedy for the kingdom, but it broke the queen. The birth had left her body weakened, and the grief now shattered her spirit. She refused food, and a fever took hold, her vibrant energy draining away like sand from a glass. I sat by her bedside day and night, moistening her lips with water, listening to her fevered murmurs. The great Queen Jadwiga, the woman who had faced down Teutonic knights and brokered peace between warring dukes, was fading before my eyes. Jadwiga was a ghost, his face etched with a grief so profound it was terrifying to witness. He would sit for hours, holding her hand, His shoulders stooped under the weight of his impending loss. 4 days after the death of their daughter, Jadwiga's mind cleared. The fever receded, leaving behind a stark, lucid calm. She knew her time was short. She summoned Jogela to her side. I made to leave to grant them privacy, but she gestured for me to stay, her eyes locking with mine. "Stay, Mary," she rasped. "Be my witness." I stood in the shadows as my queen, with the last of her strength, secured the future of the kingdom she had built. "My love," she began, her voice a fragile thread of sound. "You must not let our work falter. Poland still needs you. It needs a strong line of succession." Jogela shook his head, tears carving paths through the dust on his cheeks. "There is no succession without you, Jadwiga." "There must be," she insisted, a flicker of the old fire in her eyes. "You will marry again, you must. Marry Anna of Scilly. She has the blood of the pious in her veins. She will give the people a connection to their past, and to me. It will legitimize your future children. Promise me, Jogela." It was the request of a strategist, a queen to her very last breath. He looked at her, his heart breaking, and saw not just his dying wife, but the ruler who had made him a king. He knelt, took her hand, and pressed it to his forehead. "I promise," he choked out. Then, her gaze drifted to the large carved chest at the foot of her bed, where she kept her personal jewelry. "My jewels," she said, her voice even fainter. "My pearls, the sapphires from my mother. Sell them all?" Jogela frowned in confusion. "Why?" "For the college," she whispered. "For the university. I have already restored the one in Prague, but I want one here, in Krakow, a place of learning for our people, for Poles and Lithuanians alike, a light in the darkness. Let my vanity serve a greater purpose. Let it educate generations of scholars and priests, long after I am dust. Promise me this also." This was her true legacy, not a child of her body, but a child of her mind and soul. It was a vision of a future built not on swords, but on knowledge. Jogela, his face a mask of sorrow and awe, gave his solemn vow. She seemed to content herself with his promises. Her breathing grew shallow, and her eyes began to glaze over. I moved to her side, taking the hand the king had just released. It was cool to the touch. She looked at me, a flicker of recognition, a faint final smile. On the 17th of July, she was gone. The funeral in August was a wound in the heart of the city. They laid her in her tomb in Wawel Cathedral, and in her arms, they placed the tiny coffin of her daughter, Elizabeth Bonifacia. Mother and child, united in death as they had been for so short a time in life. King Jogela, true to his word, became the steward of her legacy. He married Anna of Scilly, and he sold every last one of Jadwiga's jewels. I watched as the glittering brooches, the heavy necklaces, and the delicate earrings were carefully packed away, their worldly beauty transformed into an immortal endowment. With that fortune, he founded the university in Krakow, an institution that would one day bear both their names, the Jagiellonian University. Now, as an old woman, I walk the halls of that great seat of learning. I see the young men hunched over their books, arguing points of philosophy and theology, their minds alight with the fire that Jadwiga kindled. They do not know that the stones around them were paid for with a queen's pearls, that their scholarship is the final, brilliant act of a mother's broken heart. But I know. And I remember the woman who, in losing her own future, gifted one to a nation. But my story, my service, did not end with the tolling of the funeral bells. It did not end when her body, draped in the simplest linen as she had wished, was laid to rest in the hallowed stone of Wawel. For some souls are bound by a loyalty that time itself cannot sever, and I have remained a silent guardian of her memory, a whisper in the corridors she once commanded with such grace. I have watched empires rise and fall from the spires of this cathedral, seen Poland flourish, suffer, and be reborn. I have watched the world change in ways that would have astonished her. Great metal birds soaring through the sky, carriages moving without horses, and voices carried across the ether. And so, I am here, today. The year, as mortals now count it, is 1997. 6 centuries have passed since I last saw her gentle face. The air in Krakow is thick not with the scent of wood smoke and horses but with anticipation and the sharp tang of exhaust from modern vehicles. The Blonia fields, where she once rode, are now a sea of people, a vast, colorful tapestry of humanity stretching further than any army I ever saw. They are all here for her. For my Jadwiga. I drift among them, unseen, unfelt, a phantom of the past swimming in an ocean of the present. They hold flags, the white and red of Poland, the yellow and white of the Holy See. On banners, her face is rendered in 1,000 different ways, some capturing her likeness with startling accuracy, others merely hinting at the serene strength in her eyes. They call her Sweeter Jadwiga. Saint Jadwiga. A man stands on a great white platform, his voice amplified by a magic I cannot comprehend, rolling over the crowd like thunder. He is the Pope, the Bishop of Rome. But he is also something more. He is a son of this Polish soil, Karol Wojtyla, a man who understands the soul of this nation, a soul Jadwiga helped to forge. He speaks of her wisdom, her piety, her immense charity. And as he speaks, the centuries fall away, and I am no longer a spirit in a strange future, but Mary, her lady-in-waiting, standing just outside the royal solar in Wawel Castle. I remember one afternoon in late autumn. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the trees in the courtyard were a riot of gold and crimson. Jadwiga was poring over documents from the university, the Krakow Academy she was determined to see revitalized. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that Poland's strength lay not just in its armies, but in the minds of its people. But the royal treasury was thin, bled by border skirmishes, and the constant demands of a growing kingdom. The chamber door swung open, and the formidable Duke Zbigniew of Olesnica strode in, his heavy boots echoing on the stone flags. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, his beard a fearsome grey, thicket, his eyes accustomed to seeing the world as a battlefield. He bowed, a perfunctory gesture that barely concealed his impatience. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice a low rumble. "The Council has reviewed your request for the Academy. We find it inadvisable at this time. The Teutonic Knights press from the north. The Tatars are a perennial threat. We need funds for more men, for steel, for fortifications, not for dusty books and ink-stained scholars." I watched Jadwiga from my corner, my needle frozen in the piece of embroidery on my lap. She did not rise. She did not raise her voice. She simply lifted her gaze from the parchment, and her blue eyes, so often filled with compassion, held the cool, unwavering clarity of a frozen lake. "And what happens when the steel rusts, Duke Zbigniew?" she asked, her voice calm but resonant. "What happens when the fortifications crumble? A wall can protect a city, but it cannot protect an idea, knowledge, faith, wisdom. These are the fortresses of the soul. They are the walls that will protect Poland for 1,000 years, long after our bones have turned to dust." The Duke scoffed, a dismissive, guttural sound. "Words. A woman's poetry. I speak of the reality of the sword. And I speak of the reality of the spirit," she countered, rising slowly to her feet. She was not a tall woman, but at that moment, she seemed to tower over him. "You see Poland as a territory to be defended. I see it as a legacy to be built. We will have both. I will not divert a single zloty from the defense of our borders." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "I will fund the Academy myself." Zbigniew's jaw went slack. "Your Majesty? With what?" "The royal purse is the kingdom's purse." Jadwiga moved to her personal jewel coffer, a heavy oak box bound in iron. She opened it. The afternoon sun caught the facets of diamonds, the deep glow of rubies, the serene luminescence of pearls. It was a treasure worthy of a great queen. Gifts from her father, from her husband, from foreign dignitaries. They were her personal wealth, symbols of her status and power. With steady hands, she began to remove them. A necklace of sapphires that mirrored the color of her eyes. Bracelets of heavy gold. Rings that had graced her fingers at every state occasion. She placed them on the table, the clatter of gem against wood a series of sharp, decisive reports. "I will sell them all," she declared. Every last one. Let my jewels become bricks and mortar. Let my pearls become parchment and ink. The Queen of Poland needs no adornment but the well-being of her people and the glory of God. Duke Zbigniew was speechless. He stared at the glittering pile, then at his young queen, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. It was a dawning, grudging respect. He had come to bully a woman. He had found a monarch made of something far stronger than steel. He bowed again, and this time, it was deep and genuine. He left without another word. Later that evening, as I helped her prepare for bed, her jewelry box sitting empty on the dressing table, she was quiet. I finally summoned the courage to speak. It was your entire fortune, Your Majesty. Everything that was yours alone. She turned to me, a small, tired smile on her lips. It was just weight, Mary. Heavy gold and cold stones. I feel lighter now. A university is a better crown for a queen to wear than one of gold, don't you think? That was the queen I knew. The woman who understood that true power was not in what you owned, but in what you gave away. That true strength was not in commanding obedience, but in inspiring devotion. A swell of cheers from the crowd pulls me back to the present. The Pope has just finished speaking. The declaration is made. He raises his arms to the sky, and the sound of 1,000,000 voices chanting her name, Jadwiga, Jadwiga, rises into the heavens. In Wawel Cathedral, the great Sigismund bell begins to toll, its deep, resonant voice singing a song of triumph across the city. It's the same bell I heard mark the hours of my life, the same sound that announced her death. But today, it rings for her rebirth, for her eternal life in the hearts of her people. They see her as a saint now, a figure of celestial perfection. But I remember the girl who loved wild strawberries, the young woman who wrestled with doubt, the queen who sacrificed her own happiness for the good of a nation. I see the flesh and blood woman behind the icon. And as I watch her people celebrate her, tears I no longer have the capacity to shed burn behind my spectral eyes. My long watch is affirmed. Her legacy, forged in wisdom and sacrifice, is not just endured, it is sanctified. And I, her humble servant, am at peace.